Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on behalf of a special partnership with Alaska Public Media. It is Sunday, January 29th, 2023, and if you'd like additional weather information on top of what I can provide, you can go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online presence. It'll bring you to a map of the continental U.S., and then all you have to do is point and click anywhere on this map, and it'll pull up forecasts and any relevant watches, warnings, or advisories for anywhere in the country. A good way to check up on what the weather's like, family and friends locations. Well, taking a look at what we're expecting here coming up here across Alaska, a bit of a wintry mix, including a little light freezing rain possible. Areas of the southwest, particularly the lower Yukon Delta, as well as parts of south central, the western Kenai, on up to about the Anchorage Bowl for now through early Monday morning. Further inland across the interior, north of the Alaska Range along and extending upward through the central and upper Yukon Valley, we do expect some frontal snow. There's kind of a backdoor front that's going to stall out across those areas, providing colder air. As this milder air overrides that colder air, it will create areas of accumulating snow. And then in the week ahead, an overall wetter pattern will redevelop across the panhandle areas of the Gulf Coast as some low pressures kind of come up into the Gulf and bring additional rain and snow. It was a relatively quiet weekend there and through the panhandle for a change. And there's really no signs of any really cold air statewide, at least into the beginning of February. Temperatures have moderated across much of the state, and that trend should hold at least through the first few days or more of February. Maybe by mid-month toward Valentine's Day, we could see a little colder temperatures returning to areas of the mainland as we get a little further along into February. Looking at the webcams from the FAA this afternoon, Fort Yukon has overcast skies. Clouds are on the increase. Temperature 2 below in the early afternoon. Arctic Village had the state's low temperature for today's date at 23 below. Anvik, further south and west, is seeing a little light freezing fog this afternoon, but could include some light freezing rain tonight into Monday, especially Monday morning, early afternoon. As a result, a winter storm warning is in effect for Anvik. Southwestward down through Scammon Bay and Hooper Bay, the areas of the lower Yukon Delta. Now, further eastward, Soldotna is seeing a light mix of some snow and freezing rain this Sunday afternoon with a temperature at 28 degrees. The temperature will be steady to slowly rising tonight into early Monday morning, and some of that mixed precipitation is going to work its way northeastward, even up into the Anchorage Bowl, where there could be a little freezing rain, especially later this Sunday evening, overnight into early Monday morning. Juneau has enjoyed a drier pattern here for the weekend. You can see the high clouds streaming in. The next weather system will spread some more rain and snow across the panhandle beginning for Monday. And here is the hazardous weather map showing the various advisories in yellow and warnings in red. Winter storm warnings for Anvik, southwestward down into the lower Yukon Delta, mainly for the potential for upwards to 1/10 of an inch of freezing rain. Temperatures further south of there, Bethel toward Dillingham, King Salmon, have been in the mid-30s this afternoon. And then as you go upriver, as that milder air aloft goes over the colder snow along the middle upper Yukon River Valley, you're going to see it change just mainly in the form of snow, accumulating snow, as much as 3 to 5 inches around Fairbanks northward up through Fort Yukon, Bettles. So keep that in mind here as we go through the day on Monday and into early Tuesday. It's going to take a little while for all that precipitation to spread eastward. And then finally, south central areas now through tonight, early Monday morning before sunrise, we expect a period of light mixed precipitation, including some snow that could change over to a period of light freezing rain or freezing drizzle. We're not anticipating heavy amounts, but enough to make for some slippery roads, especially where there's a higher population, a lot more drivers about. Be aware of that Anchorage area down along Turnagain Arm and then coming into the western Kenai Peninsula here early on Wednesday morning. Now, last week I did mention that there is a comet potentially visible in the sky. We're not going to have the greatest weather here in the next couple of days just with all the cloud cover statewide, but it's located in a couple of days from now on the evening of January 31st. It's located just to the, I should say, right of the Polaris, the North Star. And this comet has brightened enough to 4.5 magnitude, so it's barely visible to the naked eye. So it's a weak naked eye object. Still best to view it with a telescope or pair of binoculars if you're fortunate enough to have some clearing and there isn't too much auroral glow. This image was taken a few days ago by Elliot Herman in Tucson, Arizona, known for its dry and dark skies there, especially up through the mountainous areas of the Southwest. Across the state this afternoon, satellite imagery shows this plume of moisture lifting northward, coming out of the North Pacific into the Gulf. We have another one along a frontal boundary out here through the eastern Bering Sea, and there's another front back toward low pressure toward Kamchatka. So this system is going to be pushing inland across the southwest coast tonight and into the southwest interior, bringing some more moisture. That's what's going to help, again, with the moisture that's also streaming ahead of that. This area here is going to be mainly accumulating snow north of the Alaska Range, but areas down here through the lower portion of the Yukon Basin will see a mix of precipitation, including some light freezing rain, and also some of that moisture lifts northward. Areas in the western Kenai on up to about the Anchorage Bowl will have the potential of a little freezing rain here for this Sunday evening into early Monday morning. Not a heavy event, but enough to make for some slippery roads. The weather map this afternoon shows a secluded front out toward the west, pushing through the central eastern Bering. And as we go into late tonight, early on Monday morning, a secondary low will develop south of the Alaska Peninsula, southwest of Kodiak Island. We have this stalled out front across the interior back toward the Yukon. This is where the Arctic air is up to the north and east. That's why as this milder, a little more moist air overrides this colder air over the central and eastern interior, you're going to get those accumulating snows around Bettles and Fort Yukon and Fairbanks as we go through tomorrow and even lingering into the first half of Tuesday. So Monday morning, we'll see low pressure redeveloping here out over the lower Gulf, North Pacific interface. This is what's going to spread more rain and snow back up into the Panhandle starting on Monday, and there'll be a series of systems, nothing too terribly strong, but enough to keep things active across the southern half of the mainland and especially in through the Panhandle here as we go through early in the week, and another system moving in through the central Aleutians on Tuesday. So lows tonight, steady to slowly rising temperatures many areas, and then come Monday afternoon around or a little above freezing up through Anchorage, certainly across the Kenai Peninsula, and then for Tuesday morning, lows don't fall all that much and then recover back up near the freezing mark as we go from Anchorage on up toward Talkeetna. Could be in the lower 40s here, the outer southern portion of the Panhandle. Coldest air will reside in the far north along the Arctic coast, some lows 5-10 below tonight. In the east around Arctic Village, Fort Yukon. Notice though along Norton Sound, temperatures at or above freezing Monday afternoon. And then a little colder temperatures return Tuesday morning, 10-15 below there in the far northeast along areas of the North Slope. And temperatures will again be in the single digits below zero there in the northeast and far north. But along Norton Sound, temperatures might cool a few degrees back down to around 30 degrees. And then in the southwest, we'll get temperatures back up around or a bit above freezing, middle 30s for Monday morning to start. And then look at this, even in through much of the southwest interior, getting up into the mid 30s at least, with some 40-degree readings extending out the Alaska Peninsula to Dutch Harbor. And then cooling down below freezing in the southwest interior on Tuesday morning, and maybe not quite as warm, a little below freezing come Tuesday afternoon, but still readings above freezing from around King Salmon, Dillingham, southwestward through the eastern central Aleutians. Temperature-wise, February 4th through the 8th, the 6 to 10 day outlook calls for temperatures that average near normal across most of the state, a little below normal in the far northeast, and precipitation may average a little above normal, centered on the southwest portion of the mainland as we go into the early part of February.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Let's take a look at your aviation weather. If you have a flight planned Monday or on Tuesday early in the week, we're going to continue to see this push of milder air coming in up from the south, especially along areas of the west coast and then scooting on in through the interior. This is going to cause the potential for some light mix of freezing rain or freezing drizzle at times. It will also create a potential for some icing within the cloud layers, just giving these moderate temperatures. A frontal system will be pushing in through the west side of the state. Weakening to a trough with another frontal system and low pressure way back out toward along the far western Bering and the Kamchatka coast. We'll see another low with the initial front that comes on in, develop just south and southeast of Kodiak Island, and then ride eastward along the lower Gulf North Pacific interface as we go into the day on Tuesday. But widespread IFR conditions extend up into interior areas along and especially north of the Alaska Range up to the south side of the Brooks Range. Also, we have widespread IFR conditions from the Panhandle westward in through the Gulf Coast and then back out throughout the southwest and west central coast come Monday afternoon. And then for Tuesday morning, rather widespread IFR conditions cover much of the west, even up along the northwest Arctic coast, extending in through the interior Alaska Range, Cook Inlet, along areas of the Kenai Peninsula, eastward throughout much of the Panhandle. And by Tuesday afternoon, may break up a little bit, a little MVFR opening up here or there, but still pretty good-sized pockets of IFR conditions, northern Gulf in through much of the Panhandle areas of the interior from along and just north of the Alaska Range, along the Arctic coast, and then back through areas of the west, including St. Lawrence Island, and then also areas of the far central western Aleutians. Now, looking at past conditions here on Monday, Anatuvik Pass, MVFR becoming VFR. Same thing for Adigan Pass, marginal visual flight rules giving way to VFR conditions. Further south and west, though, along the west arm of the Alaska Range, IFR conditions will rule at Lake Clark and Merrill, and up along areas of Cook Inlet, and then coming up around Rainy Pass IFR, Windy Pass IFR. Further east, Isabel will generally remain IFR, and then farthest east, Mentasta may start out with MVFR but give way to IFR conditions by certainly Monday afternoon. Further south and west, Tanita Pass should generally remain in IFR conditions. And Portage Pass, the eastern half, especially out there through the east entrance and Prince William Sound, IFR conditions will rule, whereas the west entrance, MVFR conditions commonly experienced will prevail. Far northern Panhandle, generally IFR conditions will hold there throughout the day on Monday and for much of the Panhandle. So looking at freezing levels, they have bumped upward. We have the surface freezing line running along areas of the southwest interior, Bethel, down through areas along Cook Inlet, in through the eastern Kenai, northern Gulf Coast, and in through the inner channels there, especially as you get out there through the southern Panhandle. Highest freezing levels aloft, well, they've bumped up to above 2,000 and even 4,000 feet in areas of the southwest, west of the Alaska Range, and then as high as 6,000 and 8,000 feet from the outer southwest coast of the Panhandle around, say, Craig, down, and especially there through Haida Gwaii. So there is milder air aloft. This is going to create areas of moderate icing potential along much of the west coast from areas of Norton Sound down through the southwest interior, in through areas just around the central northern Alaska Peninsula, extending up in through the interior, especially north of Alaska Range, where you may encounter some icing between the surface and 10,000 feet because it's also up in the cloud layers. That milder air moves in aloft, moving southwest to northeast, and then areas off of the Panhandle above 6,000 feet. Upper level jet stream winds, not that impressive over the mainland. Behind me here, there is an area of winds aloft, a jet core as high as 125 knots, but well southwest of the Aleutians. Again, the interior, mainland, even Panhandle, not much in the way of wind at mid-level, 700 millibars, but again, stronger push of winds moving in through the eastern Aleutians, approaching the Alaska Peninsula, and then south of the central Aleutians, west-northwest winds upwards, 65 knots. And as we take a look here, the strongest winds at 3,000 feet are going to be from areas of the Alaska Peninsula, especially as we get out into the central and western portion of the Bering Sea, as high as 40, 55 knots in some cases. And bringing that down more toward the surface, expect considerable moderate turbulence from areas of the southwest, surface to 4,000 feet, extending out all along the Alaska Peninsula on up through especially the eastern and central Aleutians.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and joining us once again is Eric Stevens, our good friend from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at UAF. And thanks for joining us, Eric. Really appreciate it.
Oh, happy to be here, Dave.
We love to hear about all the fascinating developments, new and old, and how we're using the tools here, especially around Alaska. And I've got to think that, satellite meteorology right now is a fascinating time to be involved in. If we go back to the first satellite, Tyros, back in 1960, I think is when we got some of those first pictures. Weather and meteorology probably changed that day for a whole lot of people, and it's still changing today, right?
Oh, you know it. Satellite imagery is so important, and it's getting better all the time. Yeah. Of course, never perfect, but especially for us in Alaska, where there are other data sets like radars and weather balloons are so thinly spread. Right. The satellite is the great equalizer because the satellite sees everything.
Right.
Yeah. Right. We've got one particular issue in volcanic ash detection.
That's a big deal here. Yeah.
You know it. If you fly an airplane into volcanic ash, your jet engine might just fail. And an airplane without engines is in a world of hurt. Sure. So if there's a volcano that goes off, satellite imagery is the way to track that plume of ash and to tell pilots this is where you need to not be to avoid this ash plume. And there's a phrase out there, what's the difference? What's the difference?
Okay.
Well, it turns out, what we're going to discuss today, that the difference is everything. There's a technique called channel differencing.
Okay.
That if you take one piece of the spectrum of what the satellite detects and a slightly different wavelength of that spectrum, even though those two images might look similar, magical things happen when you subtract one from the other. And they reveal information that was already there, but it was hard to find until you did that subtraction.
This sounds like Nicolas Cage in National Treasure when he's got those fancy glasses and he's flipping one up and back and forth. I mean, is this what we're talking about?
Let's go more highbrow and talk Michelangelo.
Oh,
so apparently Michelangelo made some amazing sculpture, and someone said, Michael, that's amazing. How did you do it? And Michelangelo's reply allegedly was, well, in that rock, the statue was already in there.
Right.
I just scraped away the unnecessary bits. In satellite meteorology, sometimes there are meteorological features that are in the data, but you can't see it until you combine or difference some of the channels.
Okay.
And we've got a case, good old Pavlov volcano goes off now and then.
Sure.
And you can observe directly a picture of the volcano. Just take it with your iPhone. You can see a volcano going
erupting.
off. Yep. Right. But if you want to get the broad view, we need satellite to do that. Now, there are a couple of wavelengths that we can look at. So what's a wavelength? That's the amount of space between a peak and a valley and another peak in a certain part of the electromagnetic spectrum. We're going to look at 12 micron wavelength and 10.8 micron wavelength.
What is a micron?
So what's a micron? Yeah, we're getting into the geek department now. A micron is a unit of length, and it is quite tiny. We're looking at what's called long wave wavelengths.
Okay.
But it takes 25,000 of these microns to make an inch. A human blood cell is about 5 microns across. So when we're talking about 12 micron imagery as allegedly long wave, well, that's relative.
Pretty short for light.
Yeah, it's other part of the, it's just an expression for the spectrum there.
Okay.
So we can look at a 12 micron image, say a satellite image. At 12 microns, we're seeing a heat signature here, really, and the way this color enhancement works is the yellow and the red stuff is high cold clouds down here over the Gulf of Alaska into South Central. And if you were asked, where do you find the volcanic ash plume in this image?
Hey, where do you find the volcanic plume in this image?
It's hard to do. I'm not sure I could find it. If you were to look at this image and just say, show me what jumps out at you here, I'd say, well, nothing really. Well, let's look. So 12 micron doesn't help us. Let's look at 10.8 microns.
All right.
All right, look at that. It's practically the same image. So where's this volcanic ash? Can't find it at 12 microns, can't really see it at 10.8, but when we subtract one channel from the other, magically, the plume appears. The color enhancement here highlights the ash in blue.
Wow.
The information was already there, but we couldn't find it until we subtracted one channel from another.
Very interesting.
It's almost magical. Similarly, let's say you're looking for fog up on the North Slope. It's kind of a foggy neighborhood.
Sure.
In 11 micron and 3.9 micron, we've got a 3.9 micron image here. it's a big fuzzy blur over Barrow. We can't see where the fog is. But the information is lurking in there waiting for us to reveal it. All we have to do is find that difference between the 11 micron and the 3.9, and then this image becomes this image, and the fog bank jumps right out, and you can see it up there at Barrow. Now, you got to choose the right tool for the job.
Sure.
Like they say, you open your toolbox, all kinds of stuff in there. What do we need for this particular task? If you want to find volcanic ash, we look at 12 and 10.8 micron, find that difference. If you want to find fog, we'll look at 11 and 3.9 micron, find that difference. It's great, different tools for different jobs. Of course, there's always caveats and gotchas, but this fog procedure, it only works at night, because when the sun comes up, it gets in the way. So every product has its strengths and limitations, and in meteorology, the challenge is using the right tool for the right job, and these are some of those tools.
And discovery is still happening, even with meteorology. The weather's been around for a long time, but the tools that are being developed to understand the meteorology is fascinating and still very new science.
It's such a young science. We've come so far. And I'm getting old enough now that I can literally say that, you know, when I was a boy, we didn't have this kind of thing. And there's new things happening all the time. New satellites will be launched in coming years that will have better instruments than ever before. It's an exciting time, and this is so helpful for Alaska because satellites help fill in the gaps between other ways of observing the weather. Satellites, the great equalizer for Alaska.
Yeah, and help so many people stay safe in so many ways every day up here in the last frontier.
Yeah, that's what it's all about, protecting lives and property.
Well, thank you so much for joining us again, Eric. We love to hear about this fascinating information, and boy, it just makes me want to go watch satellite pictures all day. So hopefully we're inspiring more people to do the same thing, and just be curious. It's a wonderful thing. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and we'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back to the final segment of our show, the marine weather, and we start out with the sea ice edge. Ice is extensive throughout the north, the Arctic coast, the Chukchi Sea through the Bering Strait. There have been a few areas where we do have some of the shore-fast ice, a few breaks there off the north side of the Seward Peninsula. Otherwise, the ice is going to hold in place, not quite as strong of winds as what we've seen the past couple of weeks. We've had a push of milder air, especially up and around Norton Sound, where temperatures have gotten back up around and just above freezing. And the overall wind flow has been south-southwesterly, so it's prevented the ice from continuing to drift further south and west as it had been doing earlier the previous week and through a middle portion of the month. So right now the ice is kind of staying put, but we could perhaps see some movement again if we really get some stronger wind flow across the region. For the time being, though, we do expect winds here across the Panhandle not to be terribly strong. There'll be a trough frontal band push in with more rain and snow. So expect on and off rain and snow here much of the upcoming week as low pressure gets reestablished in the Gulf. Winds generally out of the southeast 15 knots, waves variable up Lynn Canal 2 foot or so there, not much going on, 3 feet. As you go further south and west, the outer Gulf Coast, look for generally a southerly component to the wind, 15 knots, except for turning easterly there west of Yakutat, waves generally running 6-7 feet. And then on Tuesday, winds will turn northeast to north across the central northern inner channels with waves of 2 or 3 feet. Southeast 25 knots, 5-foot waves there, Dixon entrance. And then areas along the outer Gulf Coast, southeast 25 to 30 knots, south of Gustavus, waves 7-8 feet. More easterly from Yakutat there westward with 7-foot waves. Across the northwestern Gulf, winds will be northeast in Prince William Sound, 10 knots, waves a couple of feet. Look for north-northeast winds the length of Cook Inlet and 15 to 25 knots with waves as high as 6 feet there at the entrance. Otherwise, off the Kenai, winds will be out in the northeast around 20 to maybe 30 knots there as you get off of Kodiak Island. And for Tuesday, winds will be northeasterly, continuing around 10 knots there. Prince William Sound waves a couple of feet, trying to turn a little more northwesterly, as high as 25 knots there near the entrance of Cook Inlet with waves of 7 to 8 feet. Across the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, there'll be an area of low pressure just southeast of there. So Shelikof Strait, northeast winds 20 knots, variable winds on the east and southeast side of Kodiak Island. and they're going to turn more west and northwesterly along the Alaska Peninsula the further away you get. 20 to 25 knots, waves 5 to 7 feet from Bristol Bay down toward north of Cold Bay. And then on Tuesday, overall across much of the region, look for winds out of the west-northwest, 25 to 30 knots around Kodiak Island, as high as 35 knots east of Chignik, with waves 11 to 13 feet. Waves will be running in the ice-free areas off of Bristol Bay, 7 to as much as 10 feet there north of Cold Bay. Across the Aleutian chain, winds will be strongest central western Aleutians, upwards of 35 to 40 knots southwesterly gales. Waves getting upwards around and above 20 feet, especially west of Atka, out through Kiska. And then come Tuesday, winds will continue southwest around 25, 30 knots there, the eastern Aleutians, Dutch Harbor, but more southerly through the central Aleutians, 30 to 35 knots. Waves 12 to 15 feet North Pacific side, 12 feet or so on the unsheltered side of the Bering Sea. The ice that's along the southwest coast, including much of the northern Bering Sea, will be not moving a whole lot here, with the southerly winds continuing about 25 knots at St. Paul up through St. Matthew. Waves could be as high as 19 feet in the vicinity of St. Matthew. And then look for winds on Tuesday, westerly winds 15 knots there in Norton Sound. Otherwise, a west-southwest flow 15, 20 knots over the ice, as high as south-southwest 30-knot winds, St. Paul to St. Matthew, with waves running in the high teens. And finally, along the Arctic coast, east winds 25 to 30 knots there, generally out of the east-northeast, lower Chukchi, and then southerly winds there on the north side of Nunavik Island to 20 knots. And then for Tuesday, we expect easterly winds 30 knots along the Arctic coast, falling off to 15 knots from the southwest from the Bering Strait up into the lower Chukchi Sea, with the ice generally there holding in place. So that wraps up the show for this Sunday evening. Thank you for joining me. I'll be back again tomorrow night.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.